Foreign financing can be fickle. It can dry up at any time, and I try to develop a framework of how to know when we should worry about that vulnerability. A current account deficit can be driven by a number of things. A major component of it is a trade deficit. It means a country is buying more from abroad than it's selling abroad to pay for it. It can also reflect an investment income deficit, which means that basically the country is paying out more on the fact that foreigners invested more in the country in the past than it's earning on investments it's made abroad in the past. So here's an example. So we're in the UK and I decided to buy some good Swiss chocolate. So that would be an import of Swiss chocolate. If I'm not going to sell anything to Switzerland, I would have to pay for that by borrowing some money from abroad to pay for the fact I'm buying more from abroad that I'm not selling anything to pay for. If you're hit by an earthquake and your infrastructure is devastated, it makes sense to borrow from abroad to rebuild and run a current account deficit. That's not a problem. But in practice, we've seen historically when countries run current account deficits, they do seem to be more vulnerable to sudden changes in foreign financing, and then they're more likely to have sharp currency movements, currency crises, financial crises, big increases in borrowing costs. So my goal today is to better understand when should they be a problem, something to worry about, and when should they not be. A nice framework to think about this is a person borrowing and taking on debt, similar to a country taking on debt from foreigners. A certain amount of debt is fine, especially if you invest it well and use it well. But when thinking about if you can pay back that debt, you need to think about the return that you've made from taking on that debt and how easy it will be to pay back the debt. And then when thinking about these international capital flows, you also need to consider things such as the exchange rate movement. If you borrowed a certain amount, it might suddenly be a lot harder to pay back if your currency is not worth as much. So you need to take into account these additional financial channels in evaluating whether you can pay back the debt. When there's heightened global risk or global uncertainty, say around risks in China or emerging markets, those risks can be amplified through the UK's pattern of international borrowing and lending. There's no automatic risk sharing that occurs. So here's an example. Say foreigners have invested in the UK equity market. Then if there's some negative event in the UK, risk increases, equity market tends to fall in the UK. So some of those losses from the fall in the UK equity market will automatically go abroad and be borne by foreigners, therefore transferring some of the risks abroad automatically. The key takeaway is when we look at vulnerabilities related to current account deficits, we need to look beyond trade. We need to focus on financial channels and financial vulnerabilities. And when you do that, a key lesson we learn is that sometimes current account deficits are risky, but sometimes they can be risk sharing.